From a college basketball perspective, who has been the top recruiter since 2010? Who's coming to mind? Okay, John Calipari. And so the first thing I want to do is I just want to show this clip, and then we'll get your guys' reaction to it.
If you go in and you tell them whatever they want to hear, what happens is you forget what you said. But they don't. They remember everything you say. And so the first time you don't do what you said you were going to do, which is everything, there's a trust breakdown. And now they don't trust that you have their back, which means they got to be about themselves. They can't be about anybody else because no one has their back. But if they know you always have their back, they can be about each other.
Mike, I'll throw it over to you.
I think what he said is exactly right. What's interesting is, as a young coach, you try to tell them what they want to hear. And then as you evolve to exactly what your culture is and what you want it to be, you're looking for young people to join into your family and your culture, so you know what you're looking for, so it's easy to recruit. But what he said is true, because I have forgotten at times early in my career.
And how long did it take before that started to switch?
Oh, as a head coach, probably 6 or 8 years. It took me a while to really establish what I thought was success at Oklahoma State, the culture that we have now. And you evolve to it, and once you realize this is what I'm looking for and this is who we are, it becomes much easier to recruit.
Well, and Becky, I'm going to toss it to you because you have some great analogies that you like to use that describes the recruiting process to when they get in your program.
Well, I think it's kind of interesting sometimes in the recruiting process. It's like if you're doing it where you're making all these promises, it's like you're kind of courting them, you know. So for those of you who are married, you know, what you did on your first couple of dates might be very different to what you do now in your relationship. And I think a lot of times that's what recruiting looks like. It's like, you know, hey, you know, let's go to the movies, let's do this, and then later it's like, hey, can you know get in the kitchen and cook me some food? So it's a little different.
It's much, and that can lead to a trust breakdown. And Tim, I asked you when you saw that, as you're watching it, your 25-year-old self, how would he have processed that?
I think when I see him, I see consistency and communication. I think that's where you have to be. And we've talked about this before. I don't think that teaching and coaching are any different than the parental role. In a parental role, if you want stability in your home and you want to build good foundations, then the consistency stays about the same. And I think with him, he's more on the lines of, here we are, this is who we are. If you like it, fine. If you don't, that's fine too.
Sure.
I think there's a fine line there that you have to figure out how to balance along, because one of the rules of social engagement initially is I'm going to be more interested in you than I am anything that I'm doing. And by that interest in you, that means I'm going to appeal to some things that you're about. And so you got to figure out at what point does that nourish the entitlement that we all hate so much once they get on our campus. And so I think somewhere in the middle of all that, the answer is not very easy, but there's authenticity that allows you to really connect with them on a personal level. But at the same time, as Mike said, this is our culture, this is who we're looking for, and you have to fit that as well as we have to fit you.
Well, and when words and actions align, trust is often built. And so what he addressed there was the word side of the equation, but then what he's now going to address is the action side of the equation. So just think about during the recruiting process, if coaches act differently towards the kids as opposed when they get them. That's what I asked him.
I don't want to be the adult that tries to I'm not on the phone with these kids all the time. I know the other coach is calling 5 days a week. I may call you once a month. And my point is, okay, if you choose us, is he going to keep calling you, or will you never hear from him again? I mean, if you want to talk to me, pick up the phone and call. If you want me to call you, text and say, Coach, I need to talk to you. Fine, I'll call you. But I'm 50-ish. You're 17. What the hell do we have in common? What are we going to talk about, your girlfriend?
Tim?
What do you want me to say to that?
But you align with that, though.
Well, I like that thinking, yeah, because that you get, especially now, today, and we're all exposed to this, you start recruiting kids that are in the 9th and 10th grade. So I think the gift of any coach, particularly someone who's growing away in age from the kids, is the ability to stay relevant. It doesn't mean that you have to stay on, think the way they do, because that's impossible, but to stay relevant in their world so that they can start looking at you as, he does get it to some degree. You know, we've all had relatives where certain grandparents or certain uncles or certain people in our families we saddle up to, and they may be distant in age, but it's because you can connect with them. And I think more than anything else, it's the ability just to stay connected to the kid, even though you're growing away in age. Not necessarily communicate on their wavelength, but just to the ability to connect with them. And that takes creativity.
Sherri, you're nodding your head.
That made me think of Calipari's clip that he's not going to call them every single day. If you're truly connected to them, as Tim said, you don't need to. That's sort of an exercise in futility. If the connection is there, you touch when you need to touch, and you understand one another, and those encounters have a little bit of substance to them, and they bide you over time.
And being authentic is something that you have no problem with now, right? When did
Talking about it.
when did that happen, though? Because when you say be who you are, what happens is you typically attract the people that you're supposed to get, right?
I agree with that. And one thing that I think is true in what you asked is I think sometimes a coach that's done it and has won a lot and had success and has gained power, I think human nature is you change if you're not careful. And that's what the people that I watch today that have been here in this group, I think for longevity and to do it right, you don't change. You stay who you are. That's what got you there, because we were all at one point just trying to make it, trying to survive. And I think that if you're genuine in that way and you are who you are, we're all different, then the players, they get a feel for that. And I think they enjoy that. And that's something that they look forward to seeing each day.
I would add to that, though, that while you try to stay the same, people's perceptions of you change, and you can't control that. So you have to be aware of that and maybe handle situations a little differently, understanding that maybe they don't see you. You still see yourself the same as you did before you had all the power, before you won all the games, but the outside world looks at you differently, and you have to be aware of that.
Becky, you're
Yeah,
not.
well, and I think
That's the it is what it is.
It is what it is.
what it is.
That's his mantra.
Not Oklahoma in general.
the authenticity part of it is really important, because if you're trying to be someone to get someone, like for example, if I have a kid and say, hey, I really need you to send me your transcript, and I text him back and write like faux show, that's not something that I don't want to communicate with them like that when they get there. So I better not do it in the recruiting process. And so for me, it's like, I want you to know who I am. You might think I'm boring, you might think I'm exciting, whatever you think, but you know who I am. And then when you get there, you know who I am. So it's that consistency.